Welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. Join me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, for real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal. How to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and masculine, you learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
Together, working at a practical level, you learn to trust that everything that is happening is for you, your growth, and ultimate freedom.
Our circumstances don't matter. It's only how we relate to them that does.
Get ready to befriend the wisdom of your body and the power of your mind.
Break Free and Trust starts now.
And welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. I'm Chris.
And I'm Jacqueline.
And today I'm going to introduce the show with a Buddhist proverb, just to mix it up a bit. So here it goes. A senior monk and a junior monk were traveling together. At one point, they came to a river with a strong current. As the monks were preparing to cross the river, they saw a very young and beautiful woman also attempting to cross. The young woman asked if they could help her cross to the other side, and the two monks glanced at one another because they had taken vows not to touch a woman. Then, without a word, the older monk picked up the woman, carried her across the river, placed her gently on the other side, and carried on his journey. The younger monk couldn't believe what had just happened. After rejoining his companion, he was speechless. An hour passed without a word between them. 2 more hours passed, then 3. Finally, the younger monk could contain himself no longer and blurted out, "As monks, we are not permitted a woman. How could you then carry that woman on your shoulders?" The older monk looked at him and replied, "Brother, I set her down on the other side of the river. Why are you still carrying her?" So Jacqueline and I are going to dive deep into the topic of forgiveness over the next hour. And for live viewers, the show is open to questions in the second half. Put them in the chat or call in at 1-800-930-2819. All right. And to get us going, Jacqueline, maybe we'll just inquire, what was the meaning or message you took from that proverb?
There's so much. The first thing that comes to mind is suffering is never really about the event itself. It's about our attachment to it. And so the younger monk had an idea of the way that things were supposed to be based on his morals, the guidance that he'd been given, etc., and was very much attached to that. The older monk did what he needed to do in the moment and let it go.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways, that's a huge piece of where most of us tend to suffer when we hold on to resentments that we can't forgive, because we walk with them. And we don't just walk with them in our minds, we walk with them in our bodies. And I'm hoping, actually, it's not something we talked about, but I'm hoping to bring the body into this podcast because it's a really big piece of what curing resentments or a lack of forgiveness looks like in the body. That's my take. What about you?
Yeah, very similar in that the suffering that comes about by carrying that resentment, by just not letting it go or not forgiving it in the moment. And it's very clear at the end. The older monk, I mean, it was did something, made a decision, and it was over immediately. The younger monk was in this mental turmoil. That's probably all he doesn't say it directly, but all he could think about for 3 hours was what has he done, what's going on, and missed probably the entire walk. So the ability for it to rob your energy and rob your life is profound.
Yeah, and I think that in a lot of ways, what actually happens is when we do something that might not necessarily align with what we think we're meant to be doing, what we're actually holding on to is a tremendous amount of guilt, which robs us of being in the present moment. And that forgiveness, we're not just talking about forgiving the other, we're also talking about forgiving ourselves. And so one of the questions that I would ask all of you listeners is, what did you set down but you keep holding on to in your mind? And can you find a way to release it? because when you release it, the freedom that comes is yours. And you recognize that in a lot of ways, the suffering that you felt was also self-created and yours as well. I think that's a good way for us to begin. No?
Yeah.
I'm wondering how you'd feel about starting with a personal story around forgiveness.
Sure.
Chris and I just recently watched a film which had a really deep impact on us. And I couldn't sleep afterwards because I had so many questions. And one of the questions that it brought up for me, what's the movie called again? Just so we can let them know. Let It Go.
I think Let It Go.
Let It Go.
And it's an Angel Studios Productions.
Yeah. One of the things that really came into my awareness was that so often in our culture, forgiveness is something that is granted to us by another. And that when somebody forgives us, it opens a doorway to us forgiving ourselves. Not always, but it can. And I got really curious about the idea of what happens when we're not forgiven by another person. How can we find our way into forgiving ourselves and letting go? And that's not something that I think we have a lot of models for in our society. But I'm sitting next to one of them. And I think it would be really neat for you to share a little bit. I mean, you don't need to get too personal, but share a little bit about your story and how you found yourself into a place of self-forgiveness.
Okay. Yeah. Thinking where the logical place to start. Well, as I've talked about in this podcast many times, the real catalyst for what I'll call my own journey of transformation came about through alcoholism and overcoming substance abuse. And within that hurricane or tornado of my alcoholism, did a lot of damage, hurt a lot of people, really hurt a lot of people. And as I came into sobriety, a big part of that program, a 12-step program, for example, is taking accountability and responsibility for the things that I did, a little bit of understanding of, what was underlying all the behavior, what were some of my, how did I behave? What were the fears? What were the belief systems that drove it? Seeing it, recognizing, taking responsibility for it, and then going out and setting on a process of apologizing or making amends to folks for the damage that I caused. And in that process, what I came to learn is by making amends and saying sorry for my part of what I've done and asking forgiveness and being forgiven in so many of those situations, I was also inherently forgiving anyone else for any part they played in things in my life, because I began to recognize that, well, I was acting from this place of not understanding, what was driving some of my actions and my conditioning, and so were they. So I found this ability not only to be forgiven, but to forgive. And then within that process, running into folks that were unable or unwilling to forgive for whatever reason that was. But again, in this process of trying to make amends, inherently realizing I'm forgiving those people for anything they may have done for me. And what came out of that is a very unexpected thing. In this process of asking for forgiveness, I was forgiving everyone I was encountering. And through forgiving others, at the very end of this process, I found finally I was able to forgive myself without being forgiven by others. And it's a roundabout way of saying what I've really come to understand about this. I call forgiveness as technology, is really what I'd set out to do in this, in this process, was a roundabout way of learning how to forgive myself, because it was my own guilt I've been carrying through my whole life. And by this process of forgiving others for their trespass or transition, what I was actually doing was forgiving myself for my own things. That was always the case.
So, what I hear in that is that forgiveness isn't actually about them at all. It's about ending the contract you have with your own suffering.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And so much so that so much of what we're forgiving the other, I have air quotes if you're just listening to this, forgiving the other person for, it's just our own projection of our own guilt on them, anyways. That's the things we notice about other people that they're doing that we don't like. It's just our own projection. We don't notice the other stuff. Everything anyone's doing is just a projection of how we think things should be. And we're forgiving our own projection, our own guilt in this process that we're giving others.
Why do you think forgiveness is so hard for most of us?
It's not our natural ego response. I mean, I think this is the interesting thing about forgiveness. Like, I don't think there's a human alive out there that doesn't understand that forgiveness is this it's virtue. It's something we aspire to. Like, is it what is it? To err is to be human, to forgive is divine. I think we all intellectually understand that. Yet, so many people will go through their entire life holding on to resentments, not forgiving, withholding forgiveness, and I think it's an ego defense mechanism. It is it is the final stage of exerting control over someone. Like, I'm gonna create this moral superiority, but I'm not gonna forgive you. I'm gonna show you my silence. I'm gonna cut you off. I'm gonna do all these things to maintain this ego separateness and control protection. Because if I ever forgive you, then I'd have to forgive myself, and I'm not ready for that yet.
I don't know that that's a conscious process, though.
No, 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 no. All of this is operating at the unconscious for sure.
Because I also, like, I hear you say, or I just heard you say that forgiveness is something that we all aspire to. And maybe on an unconscious level, that's true. But on a conscious level, I think all of us just want to be forgiven. I don't think that consciously we think that forgiving somebody else is a virtue. I think being forgiven is or appears to be freedom. I'm out, like I'm off the hook. I'm no longer responsible. Somebody else has told me I'm okay. Somebody else has said, you're a good person. I still see you. But forgiving is something entirely different. In order to forgive somebody, what we're actually doing is setting somebody free. But truly, what we're really doing is setting ourselves free of anything that we're carrying that gets in the way of our system operating the way it's meant to. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I might have misspoke, but I don't think it's something forgiveness is something everyone aspires to, but I think there's a recognition is it is virtuous. There's a recognition we had avoided. There's some benefit to forgiving others. Yet I think you're 100% right. The emphasis switches on we want to be forgiven, and that's this very egoic identified response to I'm going to gain something out of being forgiven, and if I forgive, I'm giving something away. But actually, it's the exact opposite. To forgive is to gain your freedom.
Yeah.
And then to be forgiven and not forgive the other one is to imprison yourself in this burden you're going to go around carrying the rest of your life. Just like the younger monk who's carrying this burden of this suffering. It's unnecessary. As soon as you forgive someone and truly forgive someone, you release yourself from it. It doesn't occupy any space in your mind anymore.
That's not just a mind process, though. It's also really a body process. Because I think that what happens is that when we feel wronged or somebody hurts us or somebody violates a boundary or does something that creates upset within us, it creates upset within our nervous systems. And our nervous systems are triggered into a stress response or a sympathetic response. We're no longer in a relaxed place of presence. We're in a reactive place. And our bodies end up holding that tension in different places. It could be a tightness in your chest. It could be, a tightness in your shoulders. It could look like something in your gut. And forgiveness isn't something that happens. It's something that requires a level of consciousness in order to release, not just from your mind, but also from your tissues.
Yeah. So It's interesting, and it's like I almost zoned out there for a second because it reminded me of a conversation I had in this deep coaching course I'm taking right now, where it's very a mentally constructed course, not about the body, but we got into this discussion where there's all these somatic practices we do to release energy in the body, but forgiveness is a mental activity we can take to also release energy. It can have that impact on the body as you're talking about by
Well,
forgiving.
and I think that from that standpoint, forgiveness can be a top down process, meaning that the
Mhm.
mind releases and then the body releases,
Yes.
or it can be a bottom up process where the body releases and then the mind lets
Yeah.
go.
And maybe a bit of both is like somehow the most optimal way to hit this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Hmm. Where do you want to go next?
Well, I was thinking of like as we dive into this sort of, what why does this lack of forgiveness or the inability to forgive create the suffering within us? And part of, what comes to mind is, if I'm choosing not to forgive someone for something, it also feels like I'm making the choice to really personalize it. They did that to me. That was, as opposed to, hmm, they did something that I didn't like, or I wouldn't do. I wonder what was going on with them. I wonder if they were having a bad day. I wonder if they had some trauma in their childhood. I wonder if all these different things that would be going on that would lead them to do that. If I come to those conclusions and forgive it, I'm going to feel very safe. But if I think of all these things that were just direct attacks against me that I've not forgiven, then I'm carrying the fear of that around with me everywhere I go. That I'm being attacked. This is personal. If I forgive it, I won't be safe because it was about me. And forgiveness is about realizing actually it was never about me. It's everyone going through their own psychodrama and dealing with life in their own way. And they do things that sometimes feel odd, or, it's not who they want to be, or they do things out of fear. And, you know, who am I not to forgive that? Because I've done a million of those things. And that's part of coming from one of these bottoms. If you've done so much of the stuff, you see it yourself, you're like, well, how can I not forgive everyone else?
I think the challenge with what you're speaking, and I think you're right on, and you're reminding me a little bit of the four agreements.
Mhm.
And the first agreement is don't take anything personally. One of the reasons why I think that that's so hard for most of us, and I include myself in it at different moments, is that we're not operating from the standpoint of having a system that's clear and flowing and moving naturally like a river. We're carrying on to so many past hurts and so many things that we haven't allowed ourselves to process, because processing them means letting different aspects of ourselves, letting control, letting power, letting things like that go. That when something happens, it's not like we're meeting it as an empty vessel. We're meeting it already ready, revved up, ready to defend ourselves, right, or to fight.
In survival mode.
Yeah. And so from that standpoint, forgiving somebody is very challenging because we're actually not in the moment. We're not in the present moment. We're walking around, all of us are walking around with so many stories, and as you say, psychodramas that we're carrying with us from the time we're really small. So it actually takes a tremendous amount of work to get to a place where our nervous systems are quiet enough to be able to be in a place to respond and recognize that something wasn't personal.
Mm-hmm.
And then recognize that the other person that's standing there is also in a reactive place, and that what was actually being projected onto us was their own psychodrama and their own story.
Yeah. And that's with every case.
Yeah. Do you think it's, I don't know if we can actually say this, but do you think it's more challenging to forgive another person than it is to forgive yourself, or the other way around?
I mean, my personal experience, with myself and work with others, forgiving ourselves is the absolute hardest thing to do, and it's the last thing we do. And programs like the 12 steps and probably many other programs out there, they are a a self-forgiveness program dressed up in sheep's clothing, in a sense, convincing you to forgive. Like, the idea is, the mechanism is to forgive everybody else, so you can finally, at the very end of the program, oh, now I can forgive myself. Because I think we carry around so much guilt and shame that at a very, very unconscious and subconscious level, that it's this almost this holding of this unforgiveness towards others is protecting us from actually forgiving ourselves. And that's a big part of the mechanism of why so many unhappy people go around with so many resentments. And you recognize that when I drop all my resentments, I finally have peace and freedom that I've been looking for. But those resentments to others are really just getting in the way of looking at ourselves and then finally forgiving ourselves after we've looked.
When I let go of all of my resentments, in your words, I will find peace and freedom.
Yes.
But on a conscious level, holding on to all of my resentments gives me a sense of control. Mm-hmm. It gives me a sense of power. It gives me a sense of strength that if I let go of, then what? It reminds me a little bit of the story. I'm going to bastardize the story because I can't read it to you in this moment, but this idea comes from Richard Bach's book, Illusions. And it starts off with this idea of all of these little sea creatures clinging to the bottom of the river, because letting go of the bottom of the river and what they know is terrifying, and inevitably means that for a time they're going to be thrown and smack themselves up against all kinds of rocks and other things, and they're going to be hurt for a little while before they all of a sudden just start floating down the river. And it feels a lot like letting go of our resentments puts us into that place, which is why I think people don't want to do it.
Yeah, there's this illusion that the resentments keep us safe. There's an illusion that fear, psychological fear, keeps it safe when it doesn't. It just really imprisons us. But I think also there's something else at work here too, which is the ego itself and its identification. The ego wants to identify with its resentments and its opinions and its belief. And the more entrenched we are in our ego, the more likely we are to have resentments or strong beliefs of the way it should be, and not forgiving this group and forgiving that group and these types of things. And the ego wants to keep itself very separate. And true peace and true wholeness comes from recognizing, actually, we're all just part of the same consciousness. There is no separation. And when I drop those resentments, I drop these beliefs, I drop my specialness, I now merge with everyone else and I'm one. And that's the mechanism. And the mechanism is through forgiveness to move to unconditional love and oneness, which I think is ultimately my own interpretation is that is the message of every spiritual system out there.
Do you remember the moment that you found freedom in that?
I do, actually. And so it's a hard one to tell. This was probably about 5 years ago. And, through the most turbulent times of my addiction, I got myself into material trouble, legal trouble, and through hurting somebody. And I was facing the consequence of it almost 2 years later. It was really delayed because of COVID, but I went, 2 years later, I've gone through a program of sobriety. I've done the 12 steps. I've done all this work. I found out who I was. I've gone through this process of forgiveness. And this is when I found out I was at that point of self-forgiveness, because I remember standing there in front of the judge getting sentenced. I was now going to receive the punishment that I was willing to accept for what I had done to clean up my side of the street and to make amends. And there was a bunch of options on the table. Could have been a provincial jail for a reasonable amount of time. It could have been house arrest. It could have been this. It could be that. And I just remember standing there going, I'm almost indifferent to these outcomes. I have no fear. I'm not afraid of this anymore. I've forgiven myself. I forgive myself. Now, whatever happens is going to happen. And that's just the path that God's going to send me on. And I'm going to be okay. But I knew in that moment that I had fully forgiven myself for what had transpired. I understood why it had happened. In a sense, I understood the disease of alcoholism. And I knew I wasn't that person anymore. And I was able to fully forgive myself and find salvation in that moment. And I was free. And I honestly, feel like I've been psychologically free from that day.
It's beautiful and incredibly painful.
Mm-hmm.
Did you notice the shift in that moment in your physicality?
I certainly noticed a shift by that time in my physicality. In this whole process of, like, it's much like we were talking about. I'd gone through a process of forgiving others, making amends, but I'd also gone through an intense process of doing yoga every day, lots of meditation, tons of somatic practices all at the same time. So everything we've been talking about in terms of moving the stored and trapped energy through the body, through body practices, through contemplation, through forgiveness, was all happening simultaneously to bring me to that moment, which was it was less than 2 years. It was a very rapid period to have that kind of a transformation. All those things got to that place. And yeah, I was free in my body, I was free in my mind, and free in my spirit.
You just said something that I think is really important, and that is that time doesn't lead to forgiveness.
No way.
Release does. A choice to let go and move forward leads to forgiveness. Time does not heal all wounds the way that it's often spoken about, because time can also ingrain those wounds more and more deeply into our bodies. So this place of forgiveness is deep, and there is an absolutely profound conscious choice that we have to make as individuals to choose forgiveness and to free ourselves, rather than to live in the confines or the prison of guilt and shame. And from having had the privilege to watch you from that moment forward, what I can say is you've never looked back. You've never stepped back into that prison. You've made conscious choices every day to live in the present moment and to let go, to let it go, because otherwise it would rule you.
Yeah, it's like from that day, I have, as we've talked about, I've made an active choice to forgive everyone, unconditional forgiveness for everyone, as well as I have a conscious choice to be very strict. I carry zero resentments, and I will not allow resentments to enter my life at any cost, because I know the price of them. I know the prison they create. And maybe that's a good place to stop and take a break.
I'll see you in a bit. Tune in to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living, with me, Jacqueline.
And me, Chris, on Transformation Talk Radio, every second and fourth Monday at 3 p.m.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and to heal, and how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Witness the field of potential that arises when you take personal responsibility and become the divine creator in your own life.
Visit theway-healing.com for more information.
Want a speaker who can inspire your audience and keep them laughing and learning all in the same moment? I'm Erica Gummany, and that's exactly what I hope to do when blending personal stories, deeper spiritual insights, and practical wisdom with a whole lot of humor that keeps everyone engaged. My intention is to create safe, transformative spaces where real growth and connection happen. Book me to speak or facilitate something amazing at yourpivotalpoint.com.
If you're feeling stressed, overwhelmed, or in grief, I'm here to help. I'm Faye Lau, intuitive healer and founder of Faye Inspired Healing. Through soul-guided sessions, I help you reconnect with your body's wisdom and inner truth. Whether you're healing from loss, letting go of pain, or rising into elevated energies, my work combines energy clearing, grief support, and spiritual coaching. Schedule a session or learn more at fayeinspiredhealing.com.
You ever feel it? That whisper just beneath the surface? A deeper part of you ready to rise? At Aligned Energy, we don't just inspire change, we embody transformation. This is where high-performing women come home to themselves, where the masks fall away and the real you steps forward, powerful, radiant, and fully alive. This is Manon, energy alchemist, transformation coach, and best-selling author, guiding women leaders from burnout to purpose. Together we will reconnect with your innate wisdom to clear energetic blocks and activate your eros and life force, awakening the sensual, sovereign self within. For the wild-hearted, for the ones ready to get clear, stop performing and start becoming. This is your invitation to rise and step into your power, purpose, and possibility. Visit AlignedEnergyHealing.com to book your exploratory call or session today.
And welcome back, everybody. Before the break, we spent a little bit of time on, I guess, my forgiveness journey. How about you, Jacqueline? I've got some questions for you now. Put me on the spot. Come right back at you here. I'm curious. Let me start here. When you look back at your life, what's been the biggest forgiveness lesson or opportunity that you can recall?
I feel like I have so many. I think the one that stands out most to me is quite recent, actually, and I can't remember. You can remind me if I spoke about it on a different podcast. I think I did, but from a different perspective. For me, like you, it had very much to do with forgiving myself. But it showed up in a really funny way. So somebody very close to me in my life rendered some pretty harsh judgments on me, but in relation to my son. And they made me very angry. But as I spent some time, and I got very, very triggered by them, so much so that I would say my nervous system was a wreck for a couple of weeks, in a way that I'm not sure I had ever felt before, allowed myself to feel before. But there was something really clear about what was happening, that I was sort of being called to task. And I had a moment, actually, and I would say similar to, one of the bottoms that you described, but not because my life had been destroyed, but because my ego had just collapsed, where I turned to God, and I was like, why am I so angry? Why am I so resentful? What is it about this that's triggering me so much? And what I got to see was actually very much what you just spoke, which was, well, because what's being projected on you. Actually, it's not what you spoke. What was being projected on me wasn't just this other person's projection. It was a reflection for me to look at myself. And what I was hating that this person was doing to me, what I saw was it was the very thing that I was doing to my own child.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so mad at them for doing it to my child, only to recognize that it was me and I had been doing it to my son his whole life.
And that is what I spoke. It's that your resentment and it was because you were projecting onto that person what they were bringing up in you. Yeah.
Thank you for that, for clarifying that.
Yeah.
And it was amazing because in that moment, I had two choices. One choice was to shut it down completely and deny that I had been doing those things and just relate it back to this other person. But the other was to accept the mirror and accept the reflection and see myself and the ways in which I had been hurting my own kid, who I love more than anything. And in that moment, I made the choice to look at myself in a deep, dark way. And the most interesting experience that I had out of that, well, I think it's something that I'll think about for a very, very long time. Because what happened in that moment was I named it. I've been doing this your whole life, kid. Not to him, but to myself. It was the middle of the night. And all of a sudden, it was like through the admission and the acknowledgement of it, by not hiding from it or gathering all of my defenses and attack mechanisms, which, I was really schooled at because I had been using them my whole life. Everything just fell away. I cried like a baby. But I cried, when I say I cried like a baby, I don't mean it with judgment. I mean, I cried unadulterated tears. I cried tears where there was no me controlling my response, my reaction. I was just in it. And at the end of it, at the end of that wave of emotion, it was almost like I had moved from the most turbulent ocean to the calmest lake you could ever imagine. And I was free. I forgave myself. I somehow, in the forgiving of myself, set my son free of all of these expectations and judgments. And I entered a place that felt like pure love.
Beautiful.
It was really powerful. And it was really important. It was really humbling, actually. Really humbling to, one, see that I had done things that in my own story were unforgivable. And then to meet them with loving kindness and forgiveness, and not in an airy fairy way. I mean, if you saw me in that moment, I was a total mess. But it was such an interesting experience to ride that full wave. Because I teach that wave all the time. That emotion is just a wave. And that if you give yourself permission to actually ride that wave, on the other side of it is ease.
Yeah.
The dis-ease that arises in our body because we don't give ourselves permission to fully feel and to process and then let go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, our ego tries to tell us we can't survive that. So push it back. That's not yours. Push that back to the person through a resentment and judgment and condemnation. Don't you take it on. Don't look at it. Push it back. But you took it on. You looked at it.
I think I was pushed to a place where for me, I had to.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that there is and in that, there was a death.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a profound death of my ego in that moment, which meant that you say, you can't, because the ego can't handle it. So it pushes it away. but we all reach a point
That's right.
where we can no longer live in the shadows of the ego because the ego's in the way of us living fully, right? And the reason the ego is so strong in those moments is because a lot of these things that have us masking or creating personas have happened when we were so young and in a place where we believed wholeheartedly, and actually our survival was very much attached to us being loved. And so admitting fault, admitting poor choices, admitting that we treated somebody unkindly means that I might not be deserving of love.
Yeah. We're belonging. We're fitting in. We're being accepted, which is fatal.
Oh yeah.
Fatal.
And for a child, absolutely fatal, because my mom or dad or whomever is taking care of me as a primary caregiver is going to turn their back on me and I won't be tended to.
Yeah, or I'll be kicked out of the tribe or whatever primal fear comes in. But you've exposed, like, in a really beautiful way in this story, it's like, so then what becomes this role of resentment and condemnation and judgment? It's, again, we talked about it. It's the reflection, it's the projection that reflects back to us. That resentment, a feeling of resentment, or that anger, or judgment is like, I get this. I'm supposed to look at it's informed me to look at myself. And if I can look at myself, what I'm going to find is this. I'm going to use this metaphor, is that in that childhood where we created all these defense mechanism behaviors, we created prison bars around ourselves, and we don't even know we're in prison. Like, those bars are invisible. And if we follow the path of our resentments and follow the path of the things we don't want to forgive, all of a sudden we'll start to see the prison bars, become aware of them, and then we have an opportunity to dissolve them by getting to the heart of what's going on and free ourselves. So the more resentments that we have, the more opportunities we have to see our own imprisonment. And so they play a beautiful role in our life.
Can I speak that kind of differently?
Please.
So I see it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
When we're a kid, when we're children, and even as adults, there's places that threaten us, whether it's those reflections or it's other things. And actually, what we do is we build a fortress to protect ourselves. That's where it starts.
Yes.
Is to protect ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only when we get to a place in our lives where we recognize that the fortress that we created to protect ourselves has actually become the fortress in which we are imprisoned.
Yeah, we go from surviving to then we go from survive to thrive.
Well, we go from fear and self-protection to the acknowledgement that what we've actually created is a fortress that prevents us from being able to fully love and be loved. It prevents us from being seen completely. It prevents us from belonging, because actually what we've done is we've created a perfect fortress around us to separate us in order to keep us safe.
And to protect our heart.
Yeah.
But our heart no longer needs protecting. In fact, that protecting of the heart prevents it from loving unconditionally, as well as receiving unconditional love. A Course in Miracles, its premise, it says life is just, the whole purpose of life is a series of forgiveness opportunities. We're effectively here to forgive everybody. And in doing so, through forgiving everything, we get the atonement. We get this one-ment. That's it. The whole point is to forgive everybody.
Say that one more time.
The at-one-ment.
Right.
The atonement. Yeah. The at-one-ment.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. The whole point we're here and we've lost it is we're here to forgive one another, to recognize that we're all one consciousness. And it's like, it can be no more obvious than, Jesus on the cross saying, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And they don't. We don't. When we're in this place, we're trapped. We're within that ego structure that we built to survive our childhood, that we've forgotten we don't need to carry on in adulthood. We're all still operating under that under that maladaptive survival mechanism until something happens, which makes us look at it and say, wait a minute, I don't need this anymore. And in fact, it's forcing me to have a cold heart. It's forcing me to not forgive, be in judgment, and be in resentment. I just don't need to live this way. I don't need to be in survival mode anyway. And, hopefully that event happens, that catalyst where I can look at that thing and start letting some of that go.
I think it's also really important to share, though, that, for many of us, there isn't this catalytic event that happens that forces us to our knees where all of a sudden we have to make a change. Mine felt catalytic, but it wasn't in the grand scheme of things. I wasn't risking losing everything, but there was a persona or a mask that couldn't play itself out anymore. And I say that because I think that forgiveness can happen in one fell swoop. But I'm thinking about that movie as an example. And I think often forgiveness is a process. It's a process of softening. And it could be a process of softening 1% at a time, where, I'll come back to the body in the same way that we build a fortress around us. Energetically, we build a fortress within our bodies. Our bodies all of a sudden have all of these different holding patterns, different tightening patterns, different contracting patterns that actually are very much mimicking our emotional, psychological reality. And I'll give you an example in the work that I do in terms of cranial sacral therapy. We don't go after those contractions and go right into them. We invite the body to soften, and the body only softens as much as it's ready to. Mm-hmm. And if we push it to soften too much, we push it to forgive too much before it's ready, the body tightens right away. Right? And so it's really this process of being able to honor where you're at. And can you let go of the burden that we talked about earlier in the story with the monks? Can you let go of a pound of what you're carrying at a time instead of letting the entire thing go right away? Because often, not always, but often, your body will just tense right up and you'll carry it even longer.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I think as I was thinking, you were talking about like what's the mechanism in forgiveness? It's like we can say the words, okay, you're just going and forgiving probably doesn't create that safety in the body. The body's not ready for that. But also there's the mind. Like the mechanism of forgiveness I'm talking about is to truly forgive, to recognize to recognize that the other person isn't acting in the way that you thought. And it's to take this opportunity. If I have this resentment that I don't want to forgive, truly what's asking the question you did, like what's really behind this thing? What's my part in this thing? Because I have a part. I mean, if I have resentment, I have playing a role in this dynamic. And if I can really look at that part and see how I contributed to it, and learn from that, it just creates the natural forgiveness situation. And if we don't do that and just say, well, I forgive you and don't mean it, there's no benefit to it.
Well, I'm recalling a conversation that I had with my sister Kath, and she was talking about resentments. And she said, the French word for resentment is such a powerful one. And it's not that different from the English word, but it sounds a little bit different. And in French, it's ressentiment. And ressentiment means to feel again. It's like to feel the same thing over and over and over again until we actually set ourselves free from it. So how many times do I have to relive the same experience, whether it be with, 10 different people in 10 different ways, but I'm going to re-feel that until I'm ready in my body to let it go. In my mind.
Yeah. Because it's your, the reason it keeps coming up is because it's your projection that's there to inform you of something in you that needs to be let go of or transformed. And the more you ignore it, the more resentments build up, the more imprisoned you become by your own psyche.
Go
I wanted to acknowledge something else you talked about too, about that body mechanism. And you talked about how in what you went through, that uncontrollable crying of release. And that was a big feature of, whatever transformation I went through in those first 2 years, is the early morning yoga I would do religiously for over 2 hours every morning. And for the first 6 months, this is no exaggeration, within that set, I would cry uncontrollably for about 10 minutes. And I didn't know why. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew that's what I was supposed to do. And it was painful. And it was just like all this energy from all sorts of childhood trauma and other things was being released in a way I didn't understand, that I didn't care at the time. I just knew this is meant to be happening. And it very much just goes like this. As much as, we don't all have this cataclysmic event that's painful that causes to happen, this also can't happen without pain or suffering. There has to be this is a dance between it all. And it's going to be quicker, it's going to be slow, but there's no coming to this consciousness without some type of pain or suffering. It's inevitable.
It's reminding me of the Anais Nin quote that says something like, "And the day came when the pain it took to remain tight in the bud was greater than the pain that it took to blossom."
Yeah.
And blossoming doesn't mean no pain. It means releasing the charge that has my heart so contracted. And one of the beautiful pieces of Michael Brown's work is he speaks to this, but he's not necessarily relating it to forgiveness, is that when we forgive, what we're actually doing is that we're releasing the emotional charge that is trapped in that, and we're freeing energy. Yeah. So in the freeing of energy in our body, yes, tears might come, anger might come, whatever it is might show up. But in the freeing of that emotional charge, I now have access to energy that I didn't even know was there. And then I can begin creating, right? Rather than being stagnant and stuck in the past. And through forgiveness, there's a real reclaiming of your own energy. I do think it's important, though, that we speak about the idea that forgiveness doesn't mean that of another person, just as an example, doesn't mean that you're best friends again. It doesn't mean that that person that you forgive plays a big role in your life anymore. It just means that you release them from the charge that they've been holding in your body. So when I say that, it doesn't mean forgiveness doesn't mean not having boundaries.
It doesn't mean condoning anything either.
No.
It's and that includes yourself. Like, as I said, I've forgiven myself, but I certainly don't condone my behaviors when I was going through my stuff. Not at all. But I can forgive myself for it.
Yeah. I just think that that's a really important, it's an important piece of this. Yeah. Because a big piece of what gets in the way of us forgiving means that we need to go back to the way things may have been before. And that's not true.
And I think this sort of question came up in a men's group that I run. And I think one of the things we landed on was this idea that, I think forgiving someone and saying, okay, I forgive you, but I never want to talk to you again. I don't know if that's true forgiveness, because I think what we're trying to do, if there's a change in behavior, that's the boundary. We have boundaries to behaviors, not people. And so we can forgive someone, but if we put a boundary aside, forgive you, but never want to see you again, I don't think we've forgiven them. What if they change their behavior? Why can you not be best friends with them again?
I'm not sure that I agree with you. Yeah. I think what it feels like is I've forgiven you for your behaviors. Mm-hmm. I've forgiven you for your actions. I'm not holding your person as connected to those, but I can make a choice to not want to spend time with you or see you again. And I think that does still look like forgiveness. Mm. But we can agree to disagree on that.
Yeah, maybe. I can create this yes and no. I can see, but outcome of these seeing being a form of punishment. What if they've changed all their behaviors? They've heard the message.
I think what I would say to you in that is there are consequences to actions. And we can be forgiven for our actions. And people can still hold boundaries that say, I've let you go and I no longer hold this against you, but I don't choose to invite you into my space.
Yes. And if that, I agree with you. If that's true, if that is the way you're relating to that, like fully forgiven, but I just choose not to. I'm not holding the resentment. I'm not holding the charge. It's released. Then I agree. That's entirely true. I'm more talking about you say the words, but you still hold the charge. Anyways, one of the things that as I become more sort of God-centered, for lack of a better word, spirit-centeredness, like one of the things that really dawns on me through my interaction with others is a full recognition that in my own journey, I could forgive myself because I know God forgave me. And if God forgives me, who am I not to forgive myself? And if God forgives everyone else, who am I not to forgive them? Like, who do I think I am withholding forgiveness from people when God withholds it from nobody? And that's just the way I've made sense of all this in my own world. I just thought I'd share that.
And it's beautiful. And to play devil's advocate for somebody who isn't necessarily God-centered, I would say, how do you know that you've been forgiven?
I just know.
Because you found a level of peace and ease in your system where you are free of the suffering and attachment to the pain that you were carrying that was connected to guilt and shame.
Yeah, which I would redefine as the experience of God. Right. So that we're here full circle.
Because in the absence of guilt and shame, there's only love.
That's right.
And love is an expression of God or of the divine.
And there's no separation, and just see God in all.
I wanted to say. And for those of you that aren't totally God focused, there's other ways of looking at this too.
Absolutely. I think we say every time, only speaking from my own experience, my own journey, and hope it lands. And if it doesn't, that's okay too.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Okay. See you in a couple of weeks.
You've been listening to me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, on Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living.
Tune in every second and fourth Monday at 3 p.m. on Transformation Talk Radio for more real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal. How to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and the masculine, you will learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow, and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
For more information or to connect with us personally, visit theway-healing.com. That's theway-healing.com.